Between 1939 and 1945, World War II consumed the near total resources of the largest, most powerful nations on Earth. The costs were staggering beyond imagination.
Apple picking time. It was hard to get apple pickers. So I organized a group of office people to go out Saturdays, and we go down to Max Dairy and London Dairy, to Leadbeater's out in Hopkinton, and to Farnham's here in Concord, Canterbury Shakers, and we'd pick apples, get 10 cents a bushel for it.
I thought it was my duty, my responsibility to the country to do what I could to help. And I was a teacher. They needed experienced teachers. Here was something all I needed to do was master the subject matter.
When we once were in, there was no question that 99% of the people in the country were behind the effort to give it the best possible shot we could give it, and to get it over with as soon as possible.
The unifying rhythm of the war effort was patriotism. Just as the Nazis had mobilized the people of Germany with the seductive security of nationalism, so too were Americans now responding to the call to defend their country. They marched, they rallied, they sang God Bless America and waved flags at every occasion. They took pride in being on the side of right, and there was no doubt in anyone's mind that America was going to win.
America at war. In New York, masked flags leading 500,000 marchers in the greatest patriotic and military demonstration ever seen in this or any country. Flags of the United Nations, signifying the unity of the 28 countries aligned against the Axis. Soldiers of Britain, and women too, thrilling the 5 millions that line the sidewalks for the 12-hour procession. For miles, for hours, even into the night they march. Workers in armament industries joining the procession, the home front organized for war.
Patriotism was not merely defined by attendance at rallies and parades. It was in the air you breathed, in the way you walked. It was tending a victory garden, canning your harvest. It was putting your car up on blocks and walking to work. It was knitting sweaters for sailors, wrapping bandages, giving blood, taking a bath, or merely saving your cooking grease.
As the war against the Japs increases in fury, our fighting men must have more and more precious supplies. We can help meet this urgent need by saving waste kitchen fats. 1 pound will help make 150 machine gun bullets. So keep saving all your used fats and turn them over to your butcher.
The Pledge of Allegiance was taken very serious. If the national anthem was played in a theater, by mistake, everybody stood up. They wanted to stand up. And I can remember vividly in my mind seeing people a lot older, adults, pulling their shoulders back, standing at attention, World War I veterans or soldiers in uniform. That was the climate of the area, very patriotic. And it was a repeat atmosphere over and over again. Everybody wanted to see that war end.
It's one thing you can't explain. It's a way you can't explain to somebody how come you fell in love with such a woman. The woman that you married, it's the same thing, I think, with patriotism. It's something I think you really have to experience, to go through a war in order to appreciate your love for your country, what it should be, and your concern for people that go out and do the fighting and stand up for what they believe in, and make it better for you back home.
The President bought the first defense bond and set an early example for us all. Let's get behind our Army, our Navy, and our President.
Fellow Americans, I ask you to demonstrate again your faith in America by joining me in investing in the new defense savings bonds and stamps. And I know that you will help.
We had quarterly meetings with our employees, and my husband would get up and make a speech, and he might end the speech with saying we should all buy this kind of a bond or something of that sort, because it was part of the air that we breathed at the time. I can remember when Dorothy Lamour came to town, and Dorothy looked so, I can see her now. She had a dark green suit on with mink around her collar, and she was selling war bonds. And she was on the road to Morocco and all these places with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, you know. And she was right across the street here in front of the Cafe Brioche. And she would come out and plead for money for war bonds, and Andrew Jarvis would always be the first one to get up and say, "We have $1,000 war bond." Everybody would cheer, and then everybody would go up and give their war bonds.
We had a rally every week selling bonds. At the time, I had a good singing voice, and I used to be one of the participants every week and get on that stand, and we sing, "How about a bond today?" and so forth. And we did. We sold many, many, many bonds. And I felt that it was my duty to be there at the lunch hour to do the singing and to help out.
Any bonds today, bonds of freedom, that's what I'm selling. Any bonds today, scrape up the most you can. Here comes the freedom man, asking you to buy a share of freedom today. Any stamps today.
New Hampshire's 500,000 residents bought over $500 million in war bonds between 1942 and 1945. The state slogan was, "Reach every individual." And to accomplish this, every town in the state had a war bond committee. Bonds were sold at places of work, at rallies, in schools, and at movie theaters, where purchase of a bond sometimes got you free admission to a show.
The Nazis won't quit. The Japs won't quit. And you'd better not quit. That's what you can't afford.
I never looked at it like that before.
Well, maybe some other folks haven't either. But if we want to look those boys and girls in the eye when they come marching home, or if we want to look ourselves in the eye, we won't quit. Now, the fourth war loan drive is on, and nobody can afford to buy that extra suit or that extra dress or those unrationed shoes. But what's more important is that we can all afford to buy those bonds. Let's all back the attack.
Bonds were a means by which anyone could support the war. But for men and women who were the right age, there was also military service. Over 56,000 New Hampshire residents were in uniform during the war, about 12% of the state's population at the time. Trains with recruits or draftees pulled out regularly from cities around the state. In Portsmouth, Mayor Mary Dondero personally said goodbye to every local boy.
When we had the draft calls, they'd fill up Main Street. I can remember people taking the buses out here, or else going to the railroad station back over here at the B&M station. Hey, you'd get crowds. There'd be really crowds. Several hundred people to see the draftees going off.
And I decided I'd go in service and I'd become a WWII. And I felt that somebody in my family should, because my two brothers were, well, they were 10 years younger than I was.
And I said, "Does it make any difference that I'm not 18 until tomorrow?" He said, "It sure does. I can't swear you in." But he said, "I'm leaving town at 8 o'clock. Come on down at 7:30 and I'll swear you in." So that's how I got in.
My father, when I told him, I got back from the physical exam here in Manchester, he tore off a little corner of his newspaper, made a toothpick out of it, stuck it in his mouth, and didn't say much. He just smiled, a great big broad smile. But the next day, his entire business community knew all about it. I was in the service.
It did not matter whether you enlisted or were drafted into military service. What was important was that you were in. For those who were, all doors opened and everyone was a friend. There were church suppers, USO dances, free admission to events, pretty girls always happy to sit on your lap, and thankfulness in every stranger's smile.
The majority of the people that got to know service people were very thankful that they were here. We, as a whole, maybe the association might have been a little different, but the thanks were there for being a soldier and being someone who was going to, someone who was protecting your life or protecting your country.
During the war, if you wore a uniform, everybody was glad to see you and you know, was friends with you and wanted to know where you were and what you were doing, or, you know, where you were stationed and all that.
And then when war broke loose, Jesus, you couldn't buy a beer nowhere. I mean, you want to go into a bar room or have a drink, there was always someone buying you a drink. I mean, you couldn't buy one. Your money wasn't any good. Someone always, you know. Yeah, the uniform. The uniform bought you everything.
I think a lot of the times people were thinking of their own who was somewhere else and saying, I hope somebody's as good to mine as I'm being to him.
In New York City, a huge new post office to speed mail and gifts for United States soldiers overseas. The building covers 500,000 square feet of ground and accommodates a staff of 10,000. Delivered by trains, unloaded within the building itself, Christmas parcels for the troops now arrive at the rate of 500,000 a day, addressed care of Postmaster, New York, and destined for servicemen and women on battlefronts throughout the world.
USOs and friendly strangers were consoling, but nothing could adequately fill the emptiness of being miles away from family and friends. With loved ones scattered around the country and indeed scattered around the world, letter writing took on new importance. In 1943, 571 million pieces of mail were exchanged between service people, their family, and friends. In 1945, the number was 3.5 billion, most of it scanned by military censors. For the home front, correspondence with those in the service was a contribution to the war effort, helping keep up the morale of soldiers in foxholes and sailors on ships.
We'd all write home, and then my father would arrange to have, nowadays you just Xerox it, but then they had to go through some god-awful process to reproduce it, but had a sort of a family letter, composite letter that went out to wherever we were. And it was a way of keeping in touch with each other.
It was a newsletter. Gave all the little bits of news in town. Maybe somebody had been home on leave. Maybe somebody had gotten transferred. Who'd gotten married. Who'd had a new baby. Who had just little news items, and it was great. I liked it myself.
Is it fun to read?
Oh yes, yeah. John's letters came through quite regularly, and he was one of these kids that was very popular with the girls. So he had a whole coterie of girls that he wrote to, and they'd all tell us what he had to say. So we had quite a lot of information about John.
Believe me, today we've been through some of the real stuff. The fellas are asleep now. They're half dead with exhaustion. They're filthy with sweat and dirt. But take my word for it, Mom. They're grand soldiers, every one of them. Yesterday they were kids, but tonight they're soldiers. They've come through. They're fighters. They didn't give up. And I know why. Tomorrow they'll go on, because each one of them knows that thousands of miles away, back home, there's a good soldier standing behind every one of us fighting out here. I know, Mom, you're fighting with me. I'm writing tonight to tell you that I'm as proud of you as you'll ever be of me. Ever since I got your last letter, I've been thinking of your end of the war. Thinking of you rolling those bandages. Helping to build up the blood bank. Working over at the nursery twice a week, keeping the kids out of mischief while their folks are helping to win this war. And even when it's late...
Miles of separation were bridged by a clear unity of purpose, winning the war. On the home front, the weapons included conservation, recycling, or just plain going without. And where voluntary measures weren't enough, the federal government instituted a rationing program to enforce the conservation of vital goods. Food, gas, clothing, everything and everyone had their quota or their substitute.
We started to have margarine, and the margarine came like a pound of lard. That's what it looked like, white. And it had a little yellow-orange packet in there that you would have to mix right in, so then it looked like, sort of like butter.